Carys here. You're about to get your regular over the top, under the radar with the brilliant Dr. Rob Topinka. But I wanted to slide in with a little note because we recorded this episode before the dramatic firing and defection of Robert Jenrick to Reform UK. So for those of you paying a lot of attention, Kemi Badenoch fired the Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick this morning because she had learned he was planning to defect. And by the afternoon, he had appeared on stage with Nigel Farage at a Reform UK press conference. So that's a second senior Tory and a current frontbencher that has moved over to Reform. So Rob and I are going to talk about political defections and what we mean. And I think the thrust of what we talked about still stands. But I did want to say a couple of things about Robert Jenrick because he's someone that I am a little bit obsessed with. He's had a real political transformation from being a Cameronite centrist to being this weird far-right avatar spouting kind of not even dog whistly stuff, like pretty racist stuff. So in a sense, it's sort of fitting that he's moved to Reform UK. Maybe that's his obvious political home. But I think the things that some of the Westminster coverage is missing, just because it's also dramatic and exciting and thrilling, and speeches were maybe left on a photocopier or a printer. And, you know, Kemi was like, you can't quit, I'm firing you. So like the drama of it is interesting. But I think if we take a step back and remember that most people are not political obsessives. They are not tuning in to political news multiple times a day. They may be getting it with their evening news, maybe in a newspaper, maybe just little clips on social media. And so I think for people who aren't paying close attention, this is more momentum for Reform, another chance for Nigel Farage to be in the news. And I think that whilst people who defect get a lot of flack, we have to remember that democracy and politics is based on people switching. Voters switch every election. If they didn't, we wouldn't get different governments. So whilst Jenrick is scary and sinister and shameless and snaky, I don't think this will harm Reform at all. And I have sat through his speech, it was quite long, that he gave on announcing his switch to Reform. And honestly, it's pretty sharp in terms of narrative. The core thing he's saying is Britain is broken. The big parties can't fix it. Only Reform can. I should know. I was a Tory minister. I've been in all of these rooms. We can't trust these people to fix immigration. We can't trust these people to fix the country. That's why I've joined Reform. And ultimately, that is a powerful narrative and message to the people who are considering voting Reform. So enjoy the episode and yeah, let us know what you think of this defection and all of the others. Hi, I'm Carys and Rob.
And I'm Rob Topinka, and you're listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar.
A weekly look at the stories in the news that are being overreported and the ones flying completely under the radar and not being talked about enough. My co-host today is Dr. Robert Topinka from Birkbeck University. Rob's research is focused on digital culture, reactionary politics, race and racism. And among other things, you're sort of an expert in what used to be known as the alt-right. Is that even a phrase anymore, Rob? Like, do you want to explain to people a bit about your work and your research?
Yeah. And so I've looked at race and racism for a long time, and I've also been extremely online, mostly in a lurking capacity for a long time. So I was kind of watching the alt-right emerge before it had a name. And it was mostly, racist, misogynist. And then they cohered as the alt-right, and that became sort of a brand name. But yeah, that doesn't really circulate as a phrase in the same way anymore. I now use the phrase reactionary digital politics, which captures conspiracy theorists, racists, misogynists, a whole kind of incoherent group of people reacting to, what they see as the excesses of liberalism.
And sort of woke. It's all the
anti-woke.
And some of it's MAGA, some of it's like MAGA-y or MAGA adjacent, but it's bigger than just that. Is that right?
So like MAGA and Reform are good at kind of tapping into the energy of it, but it's a little bit more loose and incoherent and unpredictable than that. And sometimes creates problems for MAGA, like with people like Nick Fuentes, with his reactionary critique of Israel, becoming kind of a mainstream figure on the right. So it sometimes creates problems for MAGA as well.
Yeah. So sort of I guess the way I think about you is like the person that is like reading Reddit and 4chan and on X and YouTube and like all the places that make me feel slightly icky and like learning about it and understanding it and then sort of theorizing about it. Is that fair?
That's pretty accurate. That's basically my life. Yeah.
And so maybe not always the funnest.
No, it's rarely fun.
And you mentioned Nick Fuentes. I'd love to talk about that and then we'll sort of get into the meat of the show. But when we met and ended up, in the pub talking about politics, as often political people do. Nick Fuentes, who I'm going to get you to explain a bit better, but who is like a far-right digital reactionary figure who is like a Holocaust denier and anti-Semite, had just been interviewed by Tucker Carlson. And I wonder if you could explain to people a little bit about that, because I think for a lot of our listeners, that would have been the first time they heard about Nick Fuentes, because they're not, extremely online, deep in the racist chats.
And he's often presented as kind of a new figure, partly because he's young, but he's not new. He's been doing this for a long time. He's been around since 2016, 2017, as part of what was then called the Groyper Army. And the Groypers are kind of a subset of the alt-right. And they had their own version of Pepe the Frog, which people might remember, that frog meme that became the symbol of the alt-right. And there was a version of it that was a kind of a chubby frog that was the Groyper meme. And they were kind of the even more extreme version of the alt-right. So he kind of made his name by trolling Charlie Kirk. When Charlie Kirk would do Q&As, Groypers would go and ask these really extreme questions, often about Israel, but other issues as well, to sort of trap Charlie Kirk into giving a serious response to a kind of flippant question. And then they would share it on Nick Fuentes' live stream, and they would all make fun of Charlie Kirk. So that was kind of how he became famous. After Kirk died, he became someone who was seen as a kind of new voice for the right, a new kind of young voice for the right. And Tucker Carlson interviewing him was a big deal, because Tucker Carlson, although he himself is pretty extreme in some of his ideas, is seen as an establishment figure. So for him to give Nick Fuentes this kind of cozy, friendly interview at his cabin.
Fireside chat, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was a big moment. And then the Heritage Foundation, which is really key for the Republican Party in the US, the president of the Heritage Foundation was asked to criticize Tucker Carlson and basically refused to do so and said, on the right, we don't cancel people. So this is a kind of a big...
respectfully disagree, but...
Well, yeah, they pretend they don't. Yeah. They do it all the time. They just use the state to do it. So then it's okay, according to them.
So I mean, for people who are really interested, this week's bonus episode will be a more in-depth conversation about some of these things. But yeah, I think the thing that I found so interesting about your work and talking to you is this, the way that a lot of these figures that suddenly blow up actually have pretty deep roots and deep lore and deep history on the internet. And it's kind of like, these like underground bands that suddenly get mainstream, but actually have been like churning out hits. I mean,
there's
racisms
like
for years. You're like that really kind of, plugged in music person who's like, I've been following them for years, except it's racists.
It's the worst stuff in the world instead of good bands.
Yeah. How did you end up doing that? You're a relatively young academic. Like, is it just because that what was bubbling up, or like, how did you end up doing this?
Partly, I just found, so when I was doing my PhD, it was 2010 is when I started. So it was the kind of the time of the Arab Spring, and there was all this optimism around digital media and social media. And it was partly just contrarian, partly that I was on Reddit all the time, and I just saw Reddit was full. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff on Reddit, but there's also a lot of misogynists and racists and deeply reactionary ideas, and they get a big audience as well as on spaces like 4chan. And so I was seeing all this happening, and just, it wasn't part of the conversation at all. It was all this idea that more people online means more democracy. And I was thinking, that's not what is necessarily going to happen. There's a lot of people who, when the gatekeepers fall, toxicity can also be unleashed. So I started looking more and more into that, and kind of switched my focus from, I was originally interested in the history of race and racism, which is still relevant to these sorts of figures. But I saw a kind of urgent political problem that was more or less being ignored. And I've sort of been stuck in that world ever since, because they keep succeeding and growing and shifting mainstream conversations.
Yeah. Probably one of the times it doesn't feel great to be right. But
yeah.
Thank you so much to everyone who supports us on Patreon, and to Jem and Richard, who just signed up as new supporters on Patreon this week. We make the podcast thanks to our brilliant community of Patreon supporters who donate each month to keep the show running. If you sign up on Patreon to support us, you get a bonus episode, you get the chance to ask questions to our guests, and you get access to the Over Under WhatsApp community, where there is a lively conversation between shows. You can join Patreon for as little as £3 a month. Go to patreon.com/overthetop under the radar. Rob and I have taken a look at this week's news agenda. We've each picked one story that we think the media have gone over the top on this week, and then one that we think has flown under the radar and not been talked about enough. And Rob, I thought you could go first and tell us about your over the top for the week.
Right. Yeah. So my over the top for this week is the story of Grok, XAI's AI chatbot on X that has been posting non-consensual sexualized images of women and children, a lot of which, qualifies as child sex abuse material. A lot of it is really violent and abusive. Women being shown, with bullet holes, with blood, tied up, a lot of really horrifying stuff. It's being used as a tactic to silence and attack female journalists and politicians. And so far, X and Musk have really refused to do anything about it. I mean, when Reuters contacted X about it, they responded with an auto reply that said legacy media lies. Musk's commented with laugh cry emojis to people criticizing him about it.
Because for those that don't know, like Grok is sort of Elon Musk's version of ChatGPT. It's like the AI client that's attached to X or like part of X.
Yeah, and Grok has an account on X that you can interact with. So, and that's part of the problem is that people will post, here's this image of so-and-so, put them in a bikini, take their clothes off, tie them up. And then that will be visible, or this has recently been changed, but it was visible for everyone in Grok's replies. So if you clicked on Grok's replies, you would be confronted with just a wall of non-consensual sexualized images, some of them of children.
Charming.
Yeah. And Musk has said, people just want to silence free speech. That's why they're responding in this way, which is, of course, ridiculous. But then also the way it's been covered has been to say, there's been all these headlines saying Grok has apologized or Grok has said things will be rethought. Of course, Grok is not a person. Grok isn't a large language model. It cannot apologize. It does not have remorse. It's good that it's getting so much coverage, but it's a moment where we're missing kind of how AI works and how this is a deliberate strategy. I mean, XAI rolled out what it called spicy mode in August, which was specifically designed for sexualized images. OpenAI has done something similar. Sam Altman recently said that OpenAI would allow erotica with ChatGPT. Okay. So this is a kind of a growth area. I mean, pornography is basically, they see it as a growth area. They see it as something that can be used to draw more engagement in. So it's not a bug, right? This is a feature.
And it's not just Grok. So it's not just Grok and it's a feature, not a bug. I mean, are you, just a quick sidebar, do you watch a show called Industry?
No, I haven't seen it. No.
Okay, well, and for those who do, anyone who does listen to the show and also watch the show Industry, just slide into my DMs on social media because I'm obsessed. But there's a new season of the show Industry that's set in sort of the banking and finance world, and a lot of this new season is going to be about a company that does payment processing for pornography. So a lot of it is about how much of the internet is porn, and like wanking is recession proof is one of the nice lines from it. But so interesting. So the broader trend really around like spicy AI content.
Yeah, because
it's not just Elon.
Yeah, no, it's not just Elon. I mean, as ever, he's taken the worst possible, most extreme version of this. Like, I don't think, Sam Altman has said it will be kind of age verified for, adults who are verified as a certain age. I don't think they'll allow the sorts of things Grok is allowing, but Grok is sort of, I guess, a leader in this space, if you can use that phrase, that other people are going to be joining. So this is not the end of it. It's just the beginning, really.
And so it's getting, I think the other thing that's been getting a lot of coverage is, and like for me, it's an ongoing bugbear that I think this Labour government and sort of Keir Starmer more broadly, I think, are often quiet on tech regulation when they should be loud. This is one of the few times where we've had quite a full-throated response from the government about Grok. Like, what do you think of that? Like, is it meaningful, substantive? Is it just about sort of jumping on headlines?
I do think it's meaningful. I mean, Ofcom is investigating, and with the Online Safety Act, they do have powers to fine relatively steep fines, or even to possibly ban Grok. And it's been banned in other countries. I mean, I think there's all sorts of problems with the Online Safety Act, but I do think there needs to be some resistance, and I do think it will be significant. I mean, the UK is, on a global scale, not the biggest market, but it's not a small market either, and it's symbolically important. So I think if Starmer actually stands up to this, it would be important. Because so far, I mean, this is part of this longer story of the last 15, 20 years is a small group of tech firms based in Silicon Valley are just changing politics and culture for everyone. in a way that's just completely unaccountable democratically. And if people aren't gonna, if governments aren't gonna respond to child sex abuse material being circulated, then what are they going to respond to? So there
Yeah.
has to be some kind of response to this.
It's interesting that the harassment of women should be a clear red line, but it does feel like the child sexual abuse images are the clear red line. And, we're in a situation now where like a teenager who has a smartphone could take a selfie of themselves and share it with someone. And if that teenager is under 16, like that is, an explicit image of a child. So like it's a complicated and murky world, but even within that, this feels like pretty clearly over the line. Like, why does it like, is Elon just trolling people? Like, why does he do it? You sort of mentioned there's like a broader trend. Like, what's going on here? Is this just all one game for him? Like,
I think it is. I mean, I think he sees any kind of limit on any speech of the kind he likes, right? Because he's happy to limit speech of kind of trans activists or critical race theorists or people who support DI. But he has this vision of any limit on his worldview is a form of censorship, is a limit on free speech. So that's basically the line he's taken so far on this particular issue. And I think it's also money. I mean, it's a great engagement strategy, right? I mean,
right,
people
gets
want to
people on
use it.
X.
Yeah, so it's getting people to use Grok, and that's important. I mean, these AI models, despite all the hype, the use cases in some ways are still limited, and people kind of run out of steam with them relatively quickly. So, like you said earlier, pornography is a great. I mean, there's a lot of money in porn, right? So I think that's it too. I mean, I think he's got his ideological justification, but also it's a moneymaker and it's an
Mm,
engagement strategy. And he
yeah.
doesn't want anything that would limit that.
So in a sense, it's like the attention kind of helps with the hype, even if it's negative attention, because like, and I mean, this is definitely true of all the big social media platforms, right? Like they're obsessed with engagement and like engagement doesn't, engagement can be like positive or negative, right? It's just like, do we have eyeballs? Do we have attention? So in that sense, it's like a great, he can't lose.
Yeah, we've seen this before with Facebook. I mean, their own internal research showed that the content they were showing teenage girls on Instagram was contributing to self-harm. And they knew
Yeah.
that, but they didn't stop because people were engaging with it. And the way it's being covered is a problem too, because these headlines about Grok apologizing is basically PR for these AI firms because they want you to think that these are, intelligent systems with their own agency, which they just aren't, right? But that's kind of a gift to them because the truth is they could change this. I mean, these models are not to get too technical, but there's this process called alignment and fine tuning, which is often done through human workers. So people will see posts and rate them according to things like how toxic they are, how abusive they are. A lot of that work is done in global south countries by very low paid workers. Because the people who create these models know they can be used for all sorts of things. So there are limits to them. XAI has chosen not to have those limits, but they could. That's not a difficult problem to solve technically.
Yeah, there's so much I want to say about that. I mean, I think that like one thing that jumps out is these companies that position themselves as disruptors and like these, these like transformative agents that are going to, build generalized intelligence, all this kind of stuff. The fact that they like, any capitalist enterprise are reliant on low paid workers in the global south feels, I mean, not amusing, but somewhat apt. The Instagram point is a really important one. And the amount of leaks we've had from Facebook about the impact of its various platforms. Instagram is obviously owned by Facebook, now Meta. Like the information companies have on the harm that their products create is already wild. But again, to your point, and I feel like it probably connects a lot with your research, that they have a lot more control and a lot more levers than they like to sort of pretend. And I mean, I think we had a bit of a window into that during the COVID pandemic when various platforms in an attempt to be responsible. I mean, they also, shared a lot of misinformation, suddenly had a lot of things like, filters to detect if you were just saying you're about to get vaccinated, add a sticker. Like, so there is a huge amount of control and levers that they can pull, but often they sort of use smoke and mirrors to pretend like, well, it's just the algorithm. Like we don't control the algorithm. Just the algorithm does what the algorithm does. But like increasingly leaks and whistleblowers have shown like that is not the case. The algorithm is built by humans and maintained by humans. Is
Yeah.
that something that comes up in terms of the spread of like far right ideas or alt right ideas or kind of digital reactionaries? Is that like, the platform's complicit in that?
Totally. I mean, and they know the thing is the algorithms are, they're these automated systems, but they're guided by what humans want them to do. And the platforms want them to solicit engagement, encourage further engagement. And far right content, reactionary content, conspiratorial content it does circulate. It does get people to click and share, whether they hate it or like it. So it's a really powerful source of engagement for them. So they are not incentivized to limit it, and they don't. And because so little pressure is put on them, they just don't do it. But they could. They absolutely could. Because
Yeah.
if you don't moderate these algorithms, if you don't moderate content, the platforms quickly become unusable, even if they're just full of spam. I mean, people don't want to use them. So there is a balance with these things that they are able to execute when they want to, but
Yeah.
they're not motivated to with these issues.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, there's no, with no regulation and a profit model that is based on scale and ads, there's like absolutely no reason to do that. And I don't know if you saw, we talked about in the show a few weeks ago, Facebook's own data, which I think was leaked to Reuters, suggested that a huge chunk of revenue was coming from fraudulent and scammy companies. And like Martin Wolf, chief economist at the FT, was a victim of one of those deepfake scams and had an absolute nightmare getting Meta to take it down. Don't know who in their comms team didn't think it was worth paying attention to, but like these companies profit from things that are not socially good. And until governments do something about it, and I think, you're right to sort of shout out Grok, but I think that weird Elon being like the pantomime villain almost allows us to forget that like all of these companies are complicit and all of them are sort of doing a lot of socially harmful stuff. But maybe this will be the beginning of that. Maybe that like this is the spark that lights the touch paper potentially to
Yeah,
like more regulation.
yeah, it could be, and it would be a useful time to think about. Yeah, Elon Musk as the bad guy almost helps excuse the sins of everyone else. So if we could talk about this as a broader problem that Grok takes to the extreme, but that other platforms and other AI chatbots have the
So
capacity to
do,
do as well,
yeah.
that would be a good way to frame it.
Okay, well, that's a great over. My over the top for the week is Nadeem Zahawi's defection from the Conservative Party to Reform UK. On Monday of this week, Nigel Farage hosted a press conference. He had his light blue background and he had a special guest, Nadeem Zahawi, former Conservative Chancellor, former vaccine minister, former Conservative MP. He also made his money setting up the polling company YouGov. He is a very, very wealthy man. So the story, which probably everyone who is paying attention has seen, is that this is a big, high-profile Conservative defection to reform. Reform's where it's at. There's already, depending on your online habits, I've already had a pre-roll video of, Nadeem telling me that Reform UK is the future of the UK and like I should join the party. I think the coverage has gone over the top and there are a couple of things in particular that have frustrated me. I mean, I think the first is just like an ongoing challenge, which is that the mainstream media seem to just get any press release or any notice of a press conference from Farage and be like, right, straight to the front page. Like, I'm not convinced this is like as newsy as the amount of coverage we've got for it suggests. Like, yes, he's a big scalp. Yes, he's potentially in a different league to like the Lee Andersons and the Nadine Dorries. Like, there's been a good half dozen Tory defections, lots of former MPs. So maybe he's a bigger name, like maybe it deserves attention, but not the extent we're getting, like the think pieces, the dissection of his political career. So like, I think I have a general bugbear about how easy it is for reform to get a ton of free media. And it feels like every single one of these press conferences gets loads of coverage. So that's kind of annoyed me. But I think the second thing is, and I want to talk a bit about the optics of this and what you think it means for reform. I think there's second things to say, and I'm not really siding with Farage or anyone there. It's like switching parties isn't that uncommon. And it's also what we ask voters to do every single election. So, like, there's been a lot of attacks of like, oh, well, this is one defection too far. It's so craven. He just wants to get in power. And it's like, political defections are like relatively common. They happen all the time. Like, Tory MPs defected to New Labour in 97. Douglas Carswell famously defected to UKIP, one of the many other political parties Nigel Farage has set up and run. There have been lots of Tories that have defected to reform. And like just critically, Zach Polanski, former Lib Dem, now leads the Greens. Like it's not a bad thing to switch parties. And it is what we ask voters to do every single election. So like I think there's a bit this idea that like there's something bad about him switching or something craven about him switching. Like, sure, he's a politician. Of course he's craven. So I think there's like a lot of focus on the switching and how big a story it is when like it just doesn't feel like that to me. But I wondered, what do you think? I'm sure you saw the story. What did you think of the coverage?
I think you're right that, I mean, reform gets taken almost like too seriously in the wrong ways. Like it gets taken really seriously, but not seriously enough. And every story is about their momentum and about how they're inevitable and how they're leading in the polls. And it's sort of treated as if that's just sort of like the fate of the nation. Like reform is going to be the next government in power.
Yeah. People in focus groups talk about when and not if Farage is as prime minister, as if like that, well, it's just going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah. But then we don't talk about what their plans are and what their ideology is and what they want to
Yeah.
do. And I think a lot of their ideas would actually be unpopular. I mean, there is sort of a MAGA analogy here where, Trump was popular until he got elected and started enacting his plan, and then no one liked it. And it was a similar thing where it was this somehow he's everywhere, but we have trouble talking about what he actually wants to do. And that's kind of what happens with Farage. It's just sort of like he has this sort of unimpeachable momentum, and that's what we talk about, and not what he wants to do in the country and to the country and how unpopular a lot of that is.
I mean, there has been some talk about whether a former vaccine minister is coherent in a party where there are lots of anti-vaxxers. But yeah, the policy scrutiny is really minimal. And I think that for me, that really jumped out because this is the week in which we got more statistics that show that net migration is falling. So, if you look at the people leaving the country and coming into the country, like we're getting closer to, the FT ran a story this week saying we might reach net zero, one for the nerds on migration. So basically, we might get to a point where as many people are leaving the country as are coming in. Now, I don't want to pretend that's like we're going to stop immigration. It's like a sort of specific phenomenon around like this period in time, like the next 5 years. But you would think that rapidly falling immigration might have an impact on the party that is like running on an anti-immigration ticket. You might think if immigration fell, then reform would have less chance of being the party of government. But like actually what we see because of how reform is covered and because of what an adept political actor Farage is most people don't think immigration is going down, even though it is. Like opinion poll at the end of last year, there's a story in The Guardian this week. People think immigration is going up even when it's going down. And like reform just ignore these statistics and bang on about asylum seeker hotels. So I think it's like, it's quite frustrating to have this kind of, and you're right, I think it is very Trumpian, this sort of like free media that
Mm.
these parties get and their leaders get because they're good TV, they're charismatic. It's fun to do a press conference. He'll sort of act out and answer questions from journalists. But like, there's not a lot of scrutiny of the policy agenda. And for me, that really does count. Like, this is a party that really is sort of the cornerstone of its politics, other than like, racism, dog whistle, or otherwise, is migration. And, the rhetorical power of Nadeem Zahawi is and other non-white figures is as first or second generation migrants being like, I came to the UK, but like what we've got going on now, too far, too much, like too many. And so, yeah, it just feels quite frustrating to have like the immigration story that we actually have and the facts, but then the sort of Farage story, as you said, of this unstoppable momentum that just doesn't interact with the facts. It's just about the vibe.
Totally. And I mean, it's interesting too, because he gets so much attention from the mainstream media, but he doesn't play the kind of mainstream media game in a way. Like he's been able to escape any kind of scrutiny from the mainstream media. And you have like the Labor Party is really worried what the newspapers are going to say, right? And
Obsessed.
Farage just doesn't care. And he's able, because of how he's covered, to just take that momentum, but he also takes it from the online world. So he's taking
Mm.
ideas like he'll kind of loosely reference conspiratorial ideas. They pick up the language of Tommy Robinson, who's of course not in the party, and they say they won't let him in, but in a way they don't have to. They don't need him in the party. They just need him out there sort of fighting the fight, and they can take his language. Like they refer to military migrants as military age males or unvetted military age males, that sort of language. They're
And is that a
basically
far
taking
right?
from,
Is that far right
yeah, that's like a
language?
far right trope that Tommy Robinson, he says that all the time. And Zia Youssef has
Military
used
age
it.
males.
Military aged males.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that the idea of just like these men that are coming to like reinforce the idea that they're all violent. There's
Yeah, that
like
they're
an army of
invaders. Yeah.
foreigners at the gate
Yeah.
invading.
And then that taps into, on the right, there's this great replacement conspiracy theory that there is this plan to forcibly, change the population of global North countries with people from the global South. And there's different kind of versions of it. Some people think it's a kind of Zionist Jewish conspiracy. Some people think it's just sort of like liberal elites are soft, so they allow it to happen. And that's the kind of argument Tommy Robinson makes that Farage can tap into. But because he's never really scrutinized, he doesn't have to, all he has to do is say Tommy Robinson's never going to be in Reform UK, but then use his talking points because he's just
Mm,
really good at kind of tapping into these various sort of momentum streams. I mean, he has more, as he likes to boast, more followers on TikTok than all their MPs combined. And he's really
yeah,
just
it's
good at like kind
insane.
of being on TikTok and like engaging with what people are saying and winking and nodding and not really saying much, but just kind of vibing out in the space, sort
Yeah, I
of.
mean, would you think of him as he's an influencer, right? Like
He
in terms
is,
of the
yeah.
size of his following, and I mean, like I don't. Again, you're more online than me, but before this incarnation of Reform UK, he made a lot of Cameo videos. And for those that don't know, Cameo is this website where you can pay minor celebrities to like record a message for you. And sometimes I wonder, like, I mean, from your perspective, you've probably been watching this for a long time, like. He's now this incredibly followed figure on TikTok, dwarfs all of the other UK politicians. He also, via GB News, I see him coming up a lot on my TikTok feed because he's like constantly clipped and talking on that. Like, can you talk a little bit about his trajectory as an influencer? And like, in that vein, is the Zahawi stuff also like a bit designed for that internet world as well as picking up the mainstream media? Like, yeah, I'd just be interested in your perspective.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think it shows that Reform UK, as people have pointed out, is not a typical party. It's a limited liability company owned, majority owned by Farage. So people in the party, like if you join the party, you don't get kind of any democratic input. It's basically a donation. So there's
Yeah.
no kind of like, policy is not filtered through like local meetings or anything like that. It's all from Farage. And online, he's very good at tapping into what has energy. So if you like his TikTok, he will do sort of like policy announcements on there, but he'll also post himself like in the back of a limo, kind of like vibing out to an Eminem song or like
No, to
yeah,
an
totally. That's
Eminem
one of his
song. Oh my
most
god,
watched videos. He
people need
also
to see
does a
it.
lot of like super cuts of him sort of owning someone. And I don't
Right.
know, this is a little
Okay.
hard to explain without, I don't know if you're familiar with the genre of funk, like PHONK.
I'm not. Hit
It's this
me.
kind of like deep fried bass music that's really common on the far right. There's a lot of kind of like Chad, like alpha Chad videos
Right.
set to this music. And there's a lot of Reform UK mashups of like Farage will own a journalist and then the bass will drop. And then they'll cut to the next
Right. And
thing
then
and
they're
the
like
bass
clip
will
for,
drop.
yeah,
So
okay.
it's like nothing particularly coherent on the policy level, but it's all just him kind of being based,
Yeah.
as they say online, like being and owning his enemies and then being cool. And then also selling merch. Like you can buy these
Shirts.
Reform
He
UK
signs a lot of
football
shirts,
shirts.
doesn't
Yeah.
he? And that's what a lot of his TikTok is, him signing football shirts, which is a
Yeah.
weird.
So this is all, I mean, this is interchangeable with what a lot of influencers do, right? They sell merch and they appear cool. They cultivate that kind of authentic relationship with their followers and sort of speak for them, but don't really, as a politician, he doesn't really, he's very rarely talks about the specifics of
Yeah.
anything.
And that kind of, I mean, I guess that serves him, doesn't it? Well,
Totally.
let's get onto your under the radar for this week, one of Nigel Farage's pals.
Yes, Donald Trump. So it's a little hard to say anything Trump does is under the radar, but there is a particular story that has not gotten much attention, which is his comments on civil rights and the civil rights movement in the US. And he recently gave an interview to the New York Times where he said that civil rights led to white people being very, very badly treated and said it was a form of reverse discrimination. And, I don't think it's news to anyone that, Trump has racist ideas and racist policies, but he doesn't usually express them in quite this direct sort of way, this kind of like unvarnished sort of criticism of civil
Mm.
rights. I mean, in the past, he's praised the civil rights movement. So for him to say this is a really big deal, I think, actually. And it's kind of it's gone under the radar. People haven't been talking about this, maybe for good reasons. I mean, so much is happening.
Yeah,
Um,
but I mean, that's part, yeah, it's the sort of, with the Trump train, it's hard to keep track of everything. But you're right, that does sound like quite a big departure.
And it's a deliberate strategy. I mean, people quote that Steve Bannon line about flooding the zone. So this is what they do. They do so much at once that you can't keep track of it. But like the civil rights movement in the US is part of the national story and has been for decades and decades, right? And it's often kind of a limited version of it and sort of presented as if, oh, the race problem was solved in the 60s with the civil rights movement. So there's all sorts of problems with the way it's memorialized in the US, but it's been kind of a consensus on the left and right that it's good and that we have certain national heroes, people like Jackie Robinson, who was the first Black player to play in Major League Baseball. It was a segregated league until Jackie Robinson joined. The Department of Defense scrubbed his page because he was in the Army during World War II. And he was court-martialed for refusing to sit at the back of an army bus. So he's a civil rights activist himself. And they removed his page. They eventually put it back on and said it was a mistake. I think partly because it got so much attention. They
So they
removed
took
his
it off.
name.
They took his page and
They
like
took his
his
page
story
down.
off a government website.
Yeah, which and like baseball is obviously a huge deal in America. It's, used to be the national pastime. Every baseball team in the US has retired Jackie Robinson's number 42. And in the outfield, which is like, these are baseball terms, might not translate, but it's like the back wall of the stadium. Everyone
Okay.
has a number 42 on the wall. So it's like this, it's part of a national memorialization of this man who's a hero, right? And to take him down from the website, it's a little thing, but I think it's a big deal. Another thing they just did was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which is a holiday,
Yeah.
used to be free entry to all national parks. And this was a bit kind of like community service day. A lot of people would go clean up the parks on that day because you could get in for free. So people would go, and it was kind of like a community belonging day. And they've recently removed that day as a free day for national park entry and made Trump's birthday
Oh
a
my
free entry
God.
day. So these are kind of like subtle things, but they go deep, and they're really attacking. A lot of you hear a lot of noise about wokeness and how wokeness has gone too far, but they're going much deeper than that, right? And
Yeah.
attacking things that are really part of a basic understanding of what it means to be American. And there's all sorts of problems with it, right? And it's misleading and incomplete, but it's a big deal, right? And this is like a deep cultural change thereafter, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, obviously, I'm not from the US, but that sense of, you're right, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, like there's a way in which figures who even can be quite radical get, I guess a bit kind of like sanitized and mainstreamed and like turned into national treasures. And at least, like you get it with Mandela or Gandhi. And it's a kind of, I guess it's like a, part of that sort of Overton window of something becoming mainstream and common sense. And so, yeah, you're right. I hadn't seen it. And it does feel like a huge shift to say that these figures who've almost been depoliticized, because we're proud of civil rights. And like, in the UK, it's like our kind of far more ridiculous version of that is like the people who were involved in the abolition of slavery movement are very much lionized, like William Wilberforce. And like, no one bothers to say like, well, why did we have to abolish slavery? Is it because the UK was like big actor in the slave trade? But that
You don't get
idea
credit
of,
for abolishing it when you started, but
yeah, well, we like to give ourselves
some
that credit,
You get
Rob.
some credit.
I think we should get some points. But yeah, I guess you're right. That sort of Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King. I didn't know about Jackie Robinson in the Second World War, but like the idea of this is a good thing and we're all proud of it. And then these people, even if they were quite radical, they become these like mainstream, like people that we all just are proud of and great. And no, it does feel like quite a major unpicking then of like a consensus that at least says racism, or the overt racism that the US had under Jim Crow, was bad. And it's good that we don't have a society like that anymore. Is there a comparison with, I guess it's a bit different, but with like Roe versus Wade, where the repeal of that happened before there was a consensus shift, right? Like, but with this, do you think this is the forerunner to even more appalling racist legislation? Like, what's your...
The Supreme Court has already stripped back the Voting Rights Act, which was one of the big legislative victories of the civil rights movement. So in a way, it's similar, although I think it's a little more subtle. Abortion has been a contentious issue in the U.S. since the 70s, really. And so, the Supreme Court decision is really unpopular, but it's been contentious, and there's been loud anti-abortion activists, pro-life activists for a long time. But there have not been loud anti-civil rights activists, right? People are loud about wokeness, and wokeness goes too far and it's silly, and they're inventing racism and seeing it where it doesn't exist and all that. But the story of civil rights is, sometimes referred to in the US as our national sin, right? The sin of racism. And like civil rights was supposed to be the thing that absolved us of that sin, which is, again, a really misleading and narrow story. But it was the story that was accepted by everyone. So it was not controversial at all. And certainly not something that the Trump team openly ran on, right? This kind of undoing of the national memory of civil rights, because it's hugely unpopular. And I don't think it's even something most people, except for, a small group of dedicated, white supremacists, think about. So for them to be taking this strategy, it is pretty alarming to me, to be honest.
Yeah, and it is. I am intrigued as to just like, I don't know if you said it in the interview, like what was bad for white people about that? That was the quote, right? He was like, "Oh, civil rights was like bad for white people." I'm like, in what way specifically? Did he give details on that, or was it just?
I think here this is again an example where I think he's kind of tapped into internet discourse, because there's been a few viral threads shared by JD Vance lately about the white millennial male who has suffered under DEI. So there was an article in Compact magazine about supposedly white millennial males can't get jobs in academia or the media anymore. And then
Right.
there was a thread by someone with a pretty big profile on X talking about how he just gave up his academic job search because he knew it was impossible. And they're very misleading and just empirically false. But JD Vance reposted it, and then Trump gave this interview not long after that. So my guess is he got it from Vance, and he did frame it around university admission and affirmative action. He didn't say affirmative action, but basically
Right.
affirmative action, and this idea that white men can no longer get into university because of diversity quotas and so on.
Right. Yeah.
Which of course
And
isn't true, but that's the framing.
right. And that's the kind of connection back to to civil rights. Okay. Well, that's truly terrifying. What should we be paying attention to on that? Do you think there'll be like more comments from Trump?
I
And
mean,
why do you think journalists don't cover that? You think it is just because there's like too much going on? Or is
yeah,
it because there's not an ability to sort of like jump ahead? So last week we talked about Venezuela, unsurprisingly, and Operation Southern Spear, if people want to listen to that. But the idea that actually there is a lot of foreshadowing. So, the conversation we had was, it felt like the Maduro abduction came from nowhere unless you'd been watching the Department for War's Southern Spear videos, like coming after the narcos, in that sense that actually some of this stuff is quite considered, maybe not from Trump, but from the people around him, of sort of like foreshadowing and breadcrumbing and like laying out a path to sort of whatever their next awful policy thing is. Like, is that, do you agree with that?
yeah. I mean, I think weirdly part of the reason it's not covered is because there is a kind of agreement that wokeness went too far in the kind of mainstream
Yeah.
establishment, and so coverage of wokeness gets the attention. So almost it gets missed when he talks about civil rights because it doesn't
Mm.
fit into that story. There's already a kind of way these stories of wokeness write themselves. So
Yeah.
weirdly, going to the civil rights movement gets missed a bit because it doesn't fit into that framework.
And
And
the
people
story that
don't
they're
join up the
comfortable
dots that
writing.
it's not
Yeah.
just wokeness. This is a real kind of attack on equality as something that's important,
Yeah.
right? So it goes much deeper, and because of that, it almost doesn't fit into the way these debates get framed in the
Mhm.
press.
Really interesting. Good under, terrifying under. My under radar is like a little, is a bit of a different one. I just don't know if you'll have seen it. But so my under the radar is the water shortages crisis in Kent and Sussex. So just a quick primer for people that are not familiar with this, because it's got some coverage, but I would say not the amount of coverage it deserves. So tens of thousands of homes across Kent and Sussex in the south of England are, at the moment, they're 4 days without water. Depending on when you're listening to this podcast, it could be 5, it could be a week. And so there are tens of thousands of homes, schools, businesses that don't have any water. And for those who don't know, England and Wales are 2 of the 3 countries in the world that have privatised water systems. So Chile's water is privatised, England and Wales's water is privatised. So unsurprisingly, there is a private company called South East Water that is responsible for the water in Kent and Sussex. And I think it is flying under the radar quite how appallingly they have messed up to mean that their main job, which is giving people water, has not been done. So that's the sort of nutshell version of the story. But I mean, I think the reason that I talk a lot about water and water companies because it just feels like absolutely bananas how little accountability there is, and like how these companies literally make out like bandits, jack up the prices, jack up our water bills, and deliver not even the minimal service. So I guess the things I wanted to say about this are, so we're getting lots of coverage of the current crisis, people collecting rainwater in bales, schools having to close. But the last time this happened was December. So like the last time this happened was a month ago. This exact same company in a very similar area. And like Southeast Water is like, I mean, this is a low bar, but it is comically bad at its job. So in December, when there were disruptions over Christmas, just after Christmas to the water supply, Southeast Water sent bottled water to Tonbridge and not Tunbridge Wells. So it didn't even send water to like the right bit of Kent where the water wasn't. I mean, in some ways, it's like become a bit of an annual thing. Christmas 2022, there were water source shortages. Summer of 2023, Sussex and Kent also had water shortages. And I guess like the thing, like this would be funny if it weren't real life. But so tens of thousands of people don't have any water. It's not the first time it's happened. Probably won't be the last. The reason that people don't have water, as far as we can tell, is that the pipes that deliver the water have burst or sprung leaks. And that is because of freeze thaw conditions. So like it's getting really cold, then it's thawing, pipes are old, and they burst. Now, these conditions, i.e. like weather, are pretty predictable. Some would say it might be a core part of the water company's job to be aware that there will be freezing and thawing in January. I mean, the Drinking Water Inspectorate, one of the many bodies that sort of monitoring water in the UK, says this problem was foreseen weeks earlier and could have been prevented. So like, those people don't have water because Southeast Water are bad at their job. But like the thing I wanted to highlight, I feel like it's getting some attention, but by no means enough, is that the chief executive of Southeast Water, this like shambolic company that is in charge of getting water to Kent and Sussex and other parts of the UK, has a chief executive called Dave Hinton. He earns £400,000 as his base salary. And in 2025, he got a bonus of over £100,000. So like, not only is this company crap, we are literally rewarding its chief executive for pretty consistent failure. I mean, this guy was initially refusing to give media interviews. He was dragged in front of the Environment and Rural Affairs Committee quite recently because, as I say, it's pretty regular that people in Kent and Sussex don't have water. And he blamed the issues on people working from home and climate change. So yeah, I just think I mean, you are not originally from the UK. Like, it is quite weird to have private companies running water. Like, it's not the case in the United States of America, which is a pretty pro-free market. And I do just think, like, I just find it so boggling, like, how bad you can be at your job if you work for a water company, and like how few consequences there are for that failure. I don't know. Had you seen the story? Are you following the water stuff?
I
Do you
did,
live in
yeah.
Kent?
I don't live in Kent, but I'm a victim of Thames water frequently in London.
Yeah, another bad actor.
Yeah, and I've lived in the UK now for 11 or 12 years, and I've never had so many water problems. Where just the water's going to be off. There's a burst pipe. This whole street has to be closed because of water. And then their bonuses keep going up, and the service keeps getting worse and keeps getting more expensive. And yet, no one is able to kind of articulate an opposition to it. You would think this would be like gold for the Labour Party. Like they could be like, we are going to.
Yeah, it's low hanging fruit. I mean, Nigel Farage has said that Hinton should resign. He didn't think it was a controversial thing to call for. And I mean, the problem is I have to enjoy this. Otherwise, I'm just really angry. But I think my favorite thing in this, there's a great piece in the Times that we can link to, just sort of cataloguing all of the comedy of errors of Southeast Water. But like, my favorite thing is that someone in the government, you know, often politicians and government figures will give a quote on the record, or sometimes they'll give a journalist like a little off the record quote and don't, you know, a source said. So here's a quote from a government source. Our confidence in the leadership is waning. Like, make that make sense. It's like thousands of people don't have water. You sent the bottled water to the wrong place because you don't know the difference between Tonbridge and Tunbridge Wells. Like, it's the second time it's happened in a month. Your chief executive was initially like, I'm not talking to the press about this. And yeah, I took a 100K bonus. Sidebar, Ofwat does now have the power to do something about bonuses, but it has decided not to. So like, I just love that we're now like, yeah, confidence is waning. And then the bit that I think really takes the cake, because as you know, you're a victim of Thames Water, as am I. Like, all these water companies are crap. Like, they made out like bandits. They sucked money out of the system and didn't put any money into the infrastructure, which is why we get sewage in our water, burst pipes. Like, Southeast Water is £1.4 billion in debt, and it spends more money servicing that debt than on infrastructure. But so like, this is the context. It's like a wild west of like sketchy companies, most of whom aren't, you know, owned by UK entities. So why would they care about the water? And another like thing that was briefed to a journalist was figures in the water sector are exasperated by Southeast Water's handling of the incident. The insiders fear the whole industry is being tarred with the same brush. And it's like, what? The brush of being crap. Like, this is the right brush to tar them with. Like, also, how bad a water company do you have to be for the other water companies, like a bunch of criminals and scammers, to be like distancing yourself? Like, oh, I mean, Southeast Water, they're a bad actor. They're a bad actor. It was just like, we're really, really just at the nadir of this stuff, or at least I hope that we are. But yeah, I think it's an interesting one. Like, it's funny. So Farage calling for the chief executive to resign, to kind of connect to our earlier conversation, that got coverage. The bonus and the salary of the chief executive has got some coverage. But like, given that we're a very wealthy nation and for several days, people haven't been able to like wash their hands, flush their toilets, drink water, it just does feel a bit like we're not hearing enough. Like, you know, Ed Davey brought it up at Prime Minister's Questions this week. So like, it's like a Lib Demi issue, but it's not a sort of national issue. Yeah, I just find it bizarre that the Labour government doesn't grandstand against companies like this. It just feels like it's an open goal and they're not kicking the ball in.
Yeah, completely. I mean, it's water. Water is
like,
fundamental to human life. Like, the water company does not provide water. I think waning confidence is a bit timid.
Yeah, water companies' pipes aren't working. Like literally the only, like you have one job, get water to people's houses.
Yeah.
There's not another job they're doing. Like
No.
it's get the water from the water sources in pipes to the houses. Like that's sort of the whole gig. And like the other thing to say is that customers' bills have risen by like an average of 20% this year. So we're paying more for less water. People that run the companies are like incompetent and arrogant. Like there's some reports that Hinton was calling local MPs and berating them. Unclear what for. So yeah, my under radar is this. I also just think like it sort of speaks to the poor political instincts of this Labour government. Like, I'm sorry, but Donald Trump will be all over this shit.
Totally.
This, like, these are easy villains. And when you've got an insurgent political party that is saying nothing in this country works, and we need a new political party and a new person to be prime minister, when we know that everyone is struggling with the cost of living, this company that is jacking up prices and not delivering a service, they feel like a convenient villain. But I don't know. It just feels like, yeah, this Labour government is not comfortable coming for like even the worst behaved companies.
For anyone, no.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. I mean, this is another thing Reform is good at. Like they talk a lot you see it on TikTok, a lot about potholes and like rubbish and green waste collection and just sort of everyday things. And this is a huge everyday problem. And it just feeds into people's sense that politics can't solve their problems because it doesn't. So why would they think it does? Why would they have any faith in?
There's no water. There's not even a bottled water. Like, there was one of the local MPs who's obviously also frustrated. So, you know, it's like we had to go and sort of check whether there was water at the places people said they could get water. And this sort of ineptness, it does ultimately feed into Reform's narrative. So that's my under the radar. I don't get why people don't talk about water more. And there's this piece in the Times where they do sort of catalogue the errors, but like this guy should lose his job. Of all the people that have to resign for shit, like if the head of OBR had to resign for posting something on the website too soon, surely the guy that runs a water company should have to resign for repeatedly not providing water to people paying quite a lot of money for said water. But who can say? That's all we've got time for the overs and unders. If people who want to hear more from Rob, our bonus episode is going to be all about his research and some of the things we've talked about today. If you want to hear our bonus episode with Rob, sign up on Patreon now, patreon.com/overthetop under the radar. And if you like the show, please leave us a review. It helps other people to find it. See you next week.